Recently, I asked the super talented artist James Gurney a question about his approach to plein air painting. He was gracious enough to respond, and as to be expected, his answer was both thoughtful and insightful. Stick around to see the advice he gave me. Hopefully you'll find it interesting and useful as well. So I've been meaning to do a plein air painting of these pomegranates, and it's been raining every day. I have about an hour and a half before sunset, and I'm trying to squeeze this in. The mosquitoes are out, and it is super hot. So I'm going to start out by sketching, and since the subject matter isn't that complicated, I'm just going to draw some simple shapes to get started. Going with a very limited Zorn palette again today, and so I'm going to mix up some background colors just to block in the basic shapes. I promise we're going to get to that specific advice that James Gurney gave me a little bit later. I am keeping in mind some of his techniques that he's shared over the years. For instance, here I'm using a large brush to paint in the background areas. The idea is that you can't really go for much detail, and it helps to make some interesting, almost accidental shapes that turn out nice. As you've noticed, I'm also painting two paintings at the same time. Probably not the best idea under the time restrictions, but I actually did this deliberately because I thought it might help keep me loose. One, it rushes you a little bit and it forces you to make your decisions faster. Two, in some way it feels like I have two chances to get it right, if that's a thing, and so I can almost relax a little bit more and also experiment a little bit. So if one painting seems to be going in a direction that I'm not quite happy with, I can experiment and try new things. So here I've started to bring in a little more of the greenish color. It's not realistic green. We're using a Zorn palette, so the green is really a mix of yellow ochre and ivory black. It has a little bit of a greenish tone, and I'm just trying to bring out the silhouette of the pomegranate and start to lay in some basic leaves. So we're about a minute away from where I got into real trouble, and I'm already starting to feel the heat. Under the pressure, I just decided to leave the background alone and go back to the pomegranate. Here I'm dropping in some thicker paint, kind of building up layers, building up a more rich color, trying to capture as best I can under the time constraints the yellow, pale green, and red. And I'm using a paper towel here to sort of blend in some of the paint, which I didn't even plan to do. I just kind of had an instinct to try, and it seemed to work pretty well. All right, let's talk about the specific James Gurney advice and how I applied that to this painting. I noticed on a recent video posted by Mr. Gurney that he had significantly altered the composition of a subject that he had painted on plein air. I've often felt hesitant to do that myself in practice, and in turn have felt very frustrated because I couldn't capture what I was seeing and therefore felt inadequate. I was really curious as to his thought processes in altering his images, and I asked him about it. You can pause the video here if you want to see my full question. He was generous enough to respond really quickly, and his answer was delightful and really surprised me. I expected him to say something like, "Yeah, I totally changed the subject matter to improve the overall effect, and I reserve the right to do so as I see fit," or something like that. His response was much more interesting. He basically said he normally tries to stay true to nature and capture what he sees. But this is the best part. He said, and I quote, "Those changes happen, not so much as a deliberate compositional decision, but rather as the result of a sort of controlled emergency, like landing a parachute in a windstorm." And I immediately knew exactly what he meant. So keeping this in mind, I felt a bit lost here, and I decided, you know what? It's time to land this parachute in this windstorm. So I painted out the background and I started to approach the leaves in a much more abstract way. And I know that's probably not the right thing to do in a plein air painting situation, but I felt like his quote gave me the freedom to try some things, especially under the time constraints, and see if I couldn't control this thing all the way home. I often get caught up with trying to make a pretty picture, and it's about dark and I have to finish either way. And at this point I start to realize, you know what, I did a pretty good job considering I made 2 paintings in less than an hour in the heat, fighting off mosquitoes, changing directions in the middle of the process, and in the end it turned out pretty good. So many thanks to Mr. Gurney for sharing his insights. I'm going to try and incorporate this wisdom as I continue to work at improving my art skills, especially at plein air painting. I hope you all find this type of content interesting and useful. If so, let me know. Best of luck as you continue to work on whatever it is you do. Peace.